It began with a single breath. Barely a sound, barely a word. Eleanor's lips trembled as she leaned toward her mother, the housekeeper, in the cold dimness of the service hallway. "I saw something," she whispered. "In the study." Her mother froze, fingers still wrapped around a silver tray. The old mansion hummed with the low groan of its pipes, the ticking of clocks that had outlived everyone who'd wound them. Beyond the oak doors, the Beaumont family dined beneath chandeliers worth more than everything in the servants' quarters combined. "What did you see?" her mother asked, voice tight as thread. Eleanor's eyes darted toward the heavy study door at the end of the corridor, the one no one but Mr. Beaumont ever entered after dusk. Her heart still raced from what she'd glimpsed an hour earlier, the faint light through the keyhole, the smell of smoke and iron, and Charles Beaumont himself, kneeling on the carpet, his hands shaking, a dark stain spreading across the floor like spilled wine. "I think he hurt someone," Eleanor whispered. Her mother's hand trembled. The tray slipped, catching the edge of the wall before it could crash. "Don't ever repeat that," she hissed. Not to anyone, but it was too late. Words once born live their own lives. And in houses like the Beaumonts, whispers traveled faster than truth. By morning, the air had changed. The millionaire patriarch didn't come down for breakfast. The servants spoke in half-sentences. Eleanor's mother scrubbed the same corner of the kitchen floor until her knuckles turned white. When Charles Beaumont finally appeared, his skin was the color of ash. His suit was immaculate, but his tie hung loose, his pupils wide. He stopped halfway down the grand staircase, gripping the railing as if the world were spinning beneath him. "Mr. Beaumont?" the butler called softly. The old man's lips moved. No sound came out. Then in one motion, he stumbled forward and collapsed. Crystals shattered, the chandelier trembled, and a scream echoed through the hall. Eleanor watched from the servants' entrance, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't know if it was guilt or fear that made her knees weak, only that whatever she had seen in that study was powerful enough to bring a man like Charles Beaumont to his knees. And somewhere, deep in her chest, a terrible thought began to form. What if he hadn't hurt someone else? What if he'd hurt himself? To hide something worse. The whisper had already left her lips, and with it, the safety of silence. The walls of the Beaumont estate, once her world of order and obedience, now pulsed with secrets that seemed to breathe in the dark. Eleanor turned toward the study door once more. Behind it, she swore she could still hear the ticking, not of the clock, but of something running out. The ambulance lights painted the marble columns in red and blue, flickering like a warning from another world. The Beaumont mansion had never looked so fragile, its opulence trembling under the weight of panic. Charles Beaumont lay unconscious on the polished floor, a half-spilled glass of brandy beside him. "Heart failure," the doctor murmured, pressing a stethoscope to the man's chest. Or shock, hard to tell. But Eleanor knew it wasn't just shock. She had seen his eyes before he fell. Wide, unseeing, filled with something older than fear. Something like recognition. The housekeeper, her mother, hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands until her fingers turned red. She didn't look at Eleanor. Not once. It was as if they both understood that what had been whispered could not be unspoken, and that whatever had happened in the study had followed them into the daylight. By the afternoon, the news had spread beyond the gates. The Hartford Chronicle called it a mysterious episode. The investors called it a liability. The family lawyer called it an unfortunate inconvenience. But none of them saw what Eleanor saw when she slipped quietly into the study that evening. The air was still heavy with the scent of smoke and something metallic. The floor had been scrubbed clean, but a faint stain remained near the desk, soaked deep into the fibers. She knelt beside it, running her fingers over the mark. That's when she noticed it, a torn corner of paper beneath the rug. She pulled it free. A fragment of a letter, burned around the edges, with only 3 words still legible. "Can't forgive this." She froze. The handwriting was neat, elegant, unmistakably Charles Beaumont's. Behind her, the door creaked. Eleanor spun around, her pulse rising. It was the butler, Mr. Langley, tall and quiet as always, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't be here." he said softly. I was just curious. He finished for her, stepping closer. His voice was calm, but his eyes glimmered with something cold. Curiosity ruins servants, Miss Eleanor. It makes them forget where they belong. She swallowed hard. He collapsed because of something in this room, didn't he? Langley paused by the desk, brushing dust from its surface with deliberate care. Mr. Beaumont has carried many burdens, some heavier than others. The past has a cruel way of collecting its debts. Then he turned to leave, but just before closing the door he added quietly, for your own sake, stop looking. That night, Charles Beaumont awoke in his bed, drenched in sweat. He muttered names no one recognized, clawed at his sheets and whispered over and over, "The girl knows. She saw it." Downstairs, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, staring at the burned fragment of the letter. Her mother had already gone to bed, the servants' wing silent. She unfolded the paper again, tracing the ink with her thumb. 3 words, and yet they throbbed with accusation. Can't forgive this. Forgive what? And who was the "this" meant for? Outside, thunder rolled over the estate, shaking the old windows. The wind carried the faint creak of the study door, opening just a little. And for the first time, Eleanor realized, whatever was haunting Charles Beaumont had just begun to haunt her too. The rain had stopped by morning, but the Beaumont mansion still wore the damp scent of fear. Every corridor seemed quieter, every clock tick louder. The servants whispered as they worked, glancing toward the master's bedroom at the top of the stairs. Charles Beaumont hadn't risen once since his collapse. Eleanor tried to focus on polishing the silver, but her mind replayed that night again and again. The letter fragment, the study door creaking open, the butler's warning. Her mother avoided her eyes, speaking only in orders. "No more talk about what you saw," she said. "Promise me, Ellie." Eleanor promised. But promises meant little when curiosity had already taken root. That afternoon, as the housekeeper and staff rushed to prepare for the family lawyer's arrival, Eleanor was sent to tidy the upstairs gallery, a long, echoing hallway lined with Beaumont portraits. The air smelled of lemon polish and dust, a mixture of money and memory. Halfway through the row, something caught her eye. A faded photograph tucked into the edge of a gilded frame. Not a painting, a candid snapshot, decades old. It showed a group of young people near a lake, their smiles frozen mid-laughter. And in the corner, barely visible, was a face Eleanor recognized instantly. Her mother. Not the stern woman in a maid's uniform she knew now, but a younger version, hair loose, barefoot on the grass, standing beside a man whose arm rested gently around her shoulders. That man was unmistakable, even beneath the blur of age. Charles Beaumont. Eleanor's throat tightened. She turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, it read, "Summer 1979, Hidden Lake." Her hands trembled. 1979. The year everyone said Charles disappeared from society for months after a business tragedy. The year no one spoke of anymore. Before she could slip the photo away, a voice startled her. "What are you doing?" It was Mrs. Pennington, the old governess, her sharp eyes like needles. Eleanor hid the photograph behind her back. "Just dusting, ma'am." "Leave the past alone, Mrs. Pennington said coldly, stepping closer. "Some things in this house are best left unremembered." Eleanor nodded, but as the woman walked away, her pulse hammered. She waited until the footsteps faded, then tucked the photograph into her apron pocket. That evening, she showed it to her mother in the servants' kitchen. The older woman's face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" "In the gallery," Eleanor said softly. "You knew him back then. Why didn't you tell me?" Her mother's hand trembled as she took the photo, eyes clouding with a mixture of grief and dread. "Because I swore I never would. That summer, it ruined everything." Eleanor leaned forward. "What happened?" Her mother looked at her, tears brimming but never falling. "Promise me something, Ellie. If you love me, if you value your life, burn this picture. Forget it exists." Eleanor shook her head. "You're afraid of something, or someone." But before her mother could answer, the lights flickered. Then a loud thud came from upstairs, went from the study. Both women froze. The old clock struck 8. And in that silence between chimes, Eleanor understood. The secrets of 1979 weren't buried. They were waiting. The house slept uneasily that night. The storm had returned, rolling over the Connecticut hills like a warning. Every flash of lightning seemed to expose something the dark had tried to hide, and Eleanor couldn't shake the sound of that heavy thud from upstairs. By midnight, she could no longer resist. She slipped from her narrow bed, the photograph tucked in her apron, and crept through the sleeping servants' corridor toward the study. The air was cold, metallic. The marble floors beneath her bare feet carried the echo of her heartbeat. The door was unlocked. Inside, the study looked untouched, neat, almost sterile. The scent of tobacco lingered faintly in the air, though Charles Beaumont had not smoked since his collapse. Books lined the shelves in perfect symmetry, a display of order that felt defensive. Eleanor approached the desk. The last time she had stood here, the floor had been stained and the lights dimmed by something unspoken. Now it gleamed as if scrubbed by guilt itself. She opened the top drawer, empty. The next, stacks of papers, financial ledgers, contracts. Then the third, locked. Her fingers brushed along the underside of the drawer's frame until she felt a small indentation, a false bottom. Her pulse quickened. She pulled a hairpin from her bun, twisting it into the keyhole. A soft click answered her. Inside was a letter sealed in dark red wax, its edges frayed, the paper yellowed with age. On the envelope, in Charles Beaumont's precise handwriting, "To be read only if I am gone." Her breath caught. Gone, as in dead? She hesitated only a moment before breaking the seal. The letter inside was written in ink that had faded to brown. The first lines made her stomach tighten. August 3rd, 1979, Hidden Lake. If you are reading this, the lie has found its way back home. She was never supposed to know. None of them were. What happened by the lake was no accident. It was a debt, one that can't be forgiven. Her vision blurred. The words echoed what she had seen in that burned fragment. Can't forgive this. She read on. We buried the truth to protect her, but guilt has a pulse. It breathes through walls. If she ever learns who she truly is, everything, the fortune, the family, ends. A creak sounded behind her. She turned sharply. The door moved slightly, as though someone had been watching. Who's there? No answer. Only the sound of rain striking the windows like fingers tapping glass. Eleanor clutched the letter and hurried back to the servants' wing. Her hands shook as she laid it beside the photograph on her bed. The pieces fit together like jagged glass. Her mother, the lake, the forbidden summer, the collapse, and the line that wouldn't leave her head. If she ever learns who she truly is. Her mother's warning replayed in her mind. Burn this picture. Forget it exists. What if her mother wasn't afraid for her but of her? Down the hall, a sudden sound broke the silence. The click of a door. Eleanor rushed to the corridor just in time to see a shadow disappear around the corner, carrying something that glimmered under the candlelight. When she returned to her room, the letter was gone. Only the photograph remained, and across the face of Charles Beaumont, someone had drawn a single perfect line in black ink. The letter was gone, stolen, but the questions it raised wouldn't leave her. By morning, Eleanor hadn't slept. Her mind burned with the words she'd read, the way her mother had looked at that photograph, and that date she couldn't stop repeating. August 3rd, 1979. So when the sun rose pale over the fog-draped lawn, Eleanor did what no servant ever dared. She slipped through the main gates of the estate and headed down the long gravel road toward town. She needed answers. And the only person still alive who might remember that summer was the one man her mother had warned her never to speak to, retired groundskeeper Samuel Finch. She found him in a weathered cottage near the lake, the same one from the photograph. His hands were gnarled with age, his eyes sharp and unkind. When she introduced herself, he stared at her for a long time before saying quietly, "You have her eyes." "Whose?" He didn't answer. Instead, he poured himself coffee and said, "You shouldn't have come here. The Beaumonts don't like the past being disturbed." I need to know what happened that summer, Eleanor said. Hidden Lake. My mother was there. So was Charles Beaumont. Finch laughed softly, not kindly. If you're her daughter, you deserve to know what kind of man he really was. He led her outside to the lake's edge. The water was black and glassy, reflecting the gray sky. It was supposed to be a celebration, he said. Charles had just inherited the family fortune. Your mother worked here, young, clever, different. He was married already, but that didn't stop him. The affair was the estate's worst-kept secret. Eleanor's chest tightened. My mother and Mr. Beaumont. He nodded. Until that night. There was a storm, much like this one. His wife, Margaret, found them here, shouting, crying, lightning striking the trees. And then, he pointed toward the far side of the lake. Someone fell in. No one knows who pushed first. But in the morning, Margaret was gone. They said she drowned. Only 2 people knew the truth. Your mother and Charles. The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. She felt sick. So you're saying, my mother was more than a housekeeper, yes, and maybe more of a Beaumont than you think. She staggered back, the photo now burning in her pocket like proof of sin. After that night, Finch continued, Charles paid everyone to stay silent. The police called it an accident. He left for Europe. Your mother disappeared for months. When she came back, she had you. And no husband. The lake rippled with wind, as though whispering the truth back at her. I think you already know why your mother's afraid, Finch said. You're the ghost that ruined him, living proof of what he tried to bury. Eleanor's voice shook. But if I'm... Shh. Finch's eyes darted to the trees. You were followed. Eleanor turned, heart hammering. A figure in a dark coat stood at the tree line, watching, motionless. She took a step back, but Finch grabbed her wrist. Go. Now. Before he... A gunshot split the air. Birds exploded from the trees. Finch staggered, clutching his shoulder. Run! He gasped. Eleanor didn't look back. She ran through the woods, branches tearing at her sleeves, the photograph falling from her pocket into the mud. Behind her, another shot echoed across Hidden Lake. And though she didn't see who fired it, she knew in her bones. The past wasn't just history. It was hunting her. Eleanor ran until the trees blurred into a single wall of darkness. Her breath tore through the silence. Her hands scraped raw from catching branches. When she finally stumbled onto the back road leading toward the estate, dawn had begun to bleed across the horizon. Pale, cold, merciless. By the time she reached the mansion, a black car was already parked in the circular drive. The family lawyer had arrived. His name was Richard Hale, a man with a face carved from stone and eyes that measured every word before it left his lips. The servants lined up nervously as he entered, removing his hat with mechanical precision. I'm here on Mr. Beaumont's instructions, he said. There's business concerning the will. Eleanor froze. The will? Charles Beaumont was alive, but perhaps not for long. Upstairs, her mother tended to the frail millionaire, who now refused to speak to anyone but Hale. Through the half-open door, Eleanor could hear fragments of conversation. Revisions, provisions, confidential addendum. Her mother emerged moments later, her face pale. Eleanor, she whispered, stay out of sight. Whatever happens today, don't interfere. But the harder she was told not to look, the stronger the pull became. That afternoon, the lawyer summoned both women to the library. Charles Beaumont sat in an armchair by the window, a blanket over his knees, his skin translucent as paper. His gaze met Eleanor's, and for the first time she saw not contempt, but sorrow. Mr. Hale, he rasped, read the clause. Hale adjusted his glasses and unfolded a thick document. Addendum to the last will and testament of Charles Everett Beaumont, dated September 10th, 2024, he began. In the event of my death, the estate, assets, and associated trusts shall remain within the Beaumont bloodline. However, he paused. Should any claimant outside of that line be proven to share direct lineage, the inheritance shall be forfeit. Entirely. Eleanor's chest tightened. What does that mean? Her mother's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. It means nothing. Don't. But Charles spoke, voice trembling. It means the truth can't stay buried any longer. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Mr. Beaumont, I must remind you. Silence, the old man whispered. His eyes locked on Eleanor. You've been looking for answers. You already know where they lead. Tears welled in her mother's eyes. Charles, please, don't do this. He turned toward her, decades of guilt in that single glance. It's too late, Margaret. Eleanor's mind reeled. Margaret. That was his wife's name. The one who had drowned in 1979. Her mother took a step back, trembling. He doesn't know what he's saying, she pleaded. He's ill, confused. Confused? Charles coughed, his voice breaking. She is our daughter. The words cracked through the room like thunder. Eleanor staggered. Her vision blurred, her breath vanished. Hale blinked, uncertain if he'd heard correctly. I beg your pardon? Charles leaned forward, his hand trembling as he pointed to Eleanor. She has my eyes. My blood. Everything I built. It belongs to her. Her mother cried out, no. The old man's voice broke into a whisper. Forgive me, Margaret, I couldn't save you then, but maybe she can save what's left. And then with one last breath, Charles Beaumont's body went still. The lawyer's pen fell to the floor. The clock struck noon. Eleanor stared at her mother, at the woman who had lied to her all her life. Is it true? She whispered. Her mother didn't answer. Instead, she sank to her knees, clutching the dead man's hand as tears streamed down her face. Outside, thunder rumbled again, rolling across the hills. And in that terrible quiet, Eleanor realized she hadn't just inherited a fortune. She'd inherited a curse. The will wasn't read again. There was no need. By nightfall, the truth had already set the house ablaze, long before the fire began. Charles Beaumont was dead. The servants spoke of strokes and heart failure, but no one dared mention what they'd heard in the library, that the housekeeper's daughter was his blood, his heir. Eleanor sat alone in the study, the storm pressing against the windows like a living thing. The walls seemed to whisper every secret that had ever been hidden within them. Her mother hadn't spoken a word since that afternoon. She'd simply vanished upstairs and locked her door. A knock broke the silence. The lawyer, Richard Hale, stepped in, removing his hat. I've spoken with the trustees, he said. They're contesting the will. Because of me. Because of uncertainty, he corrected carefully. The family name carries power, wealth. Scandal could destroy it. Until proof of your parentage is established, you have no claim, and no protection. Eleanor stared at the desk where her father had once written letters that could end fortunes. Someone took the letter from this drawer, she said. It proved everything. It's gone. Hale frowned. What letter? The one he wrote about Hidden Lake. About... She stopped. The word felt dangerous. The truth. He studied her for a long moment. If that letter exists, it's the key. But someone clearly doesn't want you to find it. A sudden crack split the air, glass shattering from the hallway. Hale turned sharply. Stay here. He disappeared into the dark. Moments later, the smell hit her. Smoke. Eleanor rushed out. Flames licked along the lower banister, racing up the drapes. The old house groaned as the fire fed on its history. Mother! She screamed, sprinting toward the servants' stairs. She found her mother in her room, kneeling before a trunk, papers scattered like feathers. The photograph of Hidden Lake burned slowly in a metal basin. Stop! Eleanor cried. What are you doing? Her mother turned, eyes wild in the flickering light. You don't understand. If they find these, if they find you, they'll destroy everything. The truth is already out. No, her mother whispered. Not all of it. Before Eleanor could stop her, she grabbed a stack of papers, letters, maybe confessions, and threw them into the fire roaring near the curtains. The flames jumped high, devouring everything. Smoke thickened, choking the air. Hale's voice echoed from below, shouting for help. Mother, we have to go. Eleanor pulled at her arm, but the older woman resisted. Go without me, she coughed. You were never supposed to be part of this. Eleanor's tears mixed with ash. I won't leave you. But then, through the rising smoke, she saw something glint in the trunk, a silver locket. Inside, beneath a cracked photograph of her mother, was a folded note sealed in red wax. The same seal as the missing letter. She snatched it just as the roof above them began to crack. Her mother screamed, "Run!" Eleanor fled down the hall, the locket clutched in her hand, heat blistering her skin. The last thing she heard before the ceiling gave way was her mother's voice, faint and breaking. Tell them what he did." Outside, the mansion's upper windows burst in orange light, the fire consuming the world that had hidden her. Eleanor fell to her knees in the wet grass, gasping for air, the locket pressed to her chest. Inside that tiny circle of silver, she could feel the heartbeat of every secret still alive. Behind her, the Beaumont estate, the symbol of everything her father built on lies, collapsed in flames. And in the reflection of that inferno, Eleanor saw herself not as a servant, not as an orphan, but as the last surviving Beaumont. The fire consumed the estate until dawn. What had once been a monument to old money now lay in blackened ruin, smoke curling like ghosts over the smoldering bones of the Beaumont dynasty. The town gathered beyond the gates, whispering of tragedy, of arson, of scandal. But no one knew the truth. Not yet. Eleanor stood among the ashes, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her face streaked with soot. The locket she'd salvaged from the flames hung heavy against her chest. Inside it, the sealed note waited, unburned, unbroken. Her mother's body was never found. Some said the fire had devoured everything. Others swore they saw a figure running toward the woods before the roof caved in. Eleanor wanted to believe the latter. She needed to. Richard Hale arrived that morning, his shoes blackened by ash. "They'll blame you," he said quietly. "The servants, the trustees, the papers. They all think you had something to gain." "I lost everything," Eleanor whispered. "Not everything." He gestured to the locket. "What's inside may be what they're all afraid of." She hesitated, fingers trembling as she broke the wax seal. The paper inside was brittle, but the ink still sharp, Charles Beaumont's handwriting. "If you are reading this, the fire has already begun. The sins of my name cannot be buried by wealth. I kept her secret to protect her, but the truth was never mine to own. There was another survivor that night at Hidden Lake. She knows everything. Find her before they do." Eleanor stared at the words. "Another survivor." "Who?" Hale asked. "There's no name," she said. "Only this." She turned the paper over, a single line written on the back. "The truth waits at Hidden Lake." By nightfall, Eleanor returned there. The lake was still and gray, the trees heavy with mist. The last place her parents' lives had shattered, and the only place left to find the missing piece. She followed the path to the old boathouse, half collapsed and covered in vines. Inside, everything smelled of rot and memory. A sudden sound made her stop, a shuffle of feet behind her. She spun around. A man stood in the doorway, his coat dripping from rain, his face gaunt but unmistakably familiar. Samuel Finch. Her voice faltered. "You're alive?" He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have come back. I saw you get shot. You saw me fall. Not the same thing." He stepped closer, eyes flicking toward the locket. "You found it, didn't you?" His confession. Eleanor backed away. "He said there was another survivor. Was it you?" Finch's face darkened. "No, it was her." He pointed past her, toward the far end of the boathouse. A shape moved there, emerging from the shadows. A woman, her face hidden beneath a hood. Eleanor's breath caught. "Mother?" The woman stepped forward, eyes glinting beneath the lantern light. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "I told you not to look for me." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "You're alive." Her mother nodded, then turned to Finch. "Tell her what you did." Finch's jaw tightened. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Margaret was never meant to die. Eleanor blinked in confusion. "Margaret? You mean—" Her mother cut in sharply. "Margaret didn't drown. She was murdered." The boathouse seemed to tilt. Rain lashed against the windows. Finch stepped back. "Careful what you say, Clara." Eleanor's heart stopped. Clara, not Margaret. Clara, the name of the housekeeper. Her mother wasn't the dead wife. She was the secret lover. Then who was buried under Margaret Beaumont's name? Eleanor demanded. Neither of them answered. Lightning flashed, and in that split second, Eleanor saw the glint of metal in Finch's hand. A gun. The truth wasn't waiting at the lake. It was pointing straight at her. The gun gleamed under the flickering lantern light. Rain battered the old boathouse, thunder cracking like the judgment of heaven itself. Eleanor froze where she stood, her pulse pounding in her throat. "Put it down, Finch," Clara said quietly, stepping between him and her daughter. "You don't understand," Finch hissed. "She's not supposed to know. If the world finds out what happened, what we did, everything collapses. The Beaumonts, the trustees, the whole damned name." Eleanor's voice shook. "What did you do?" Finch's eyes flicked to her. "The night at Hidden Lake. Margaret wasn't supposed to die. She wanted to expose him, to take everything. Charles begged for help and I—" His words caught. "I thought I was protecting them both." "You killed her," Clara said, her voice trembling with rage. "It was an accident," he shouted, the gun shaking in his hand. "The storm, the mud, she slipped. I tried to pull her out, but she was gone. Charles made me swear to bury it, said he'd take care of you. He never told me about the girl." Eleanor stepped closer. "You buried a woman alive in a lie, and you let my mother live in fear for decades." Finch's grip tightened. "If this comes out, they'll destroy you too. Don't you get it? The bloodline clause, it's poison. If they find out you're his daughter, they'll erase you to keep their empire intact." Clara moved slowly, her palms raised. "Please, Sam. We've lived in silence too long. Let it end." Finch's gaze flickered, between Clara, the gun, and Eleanor's tear-streaked face. For a moment, it looked like he might drop it. Then a voice called from outside. "Police! Drop your weapon!" Richard Hale stepped into the doorway, soaked but resolute, a flashlight beam slicing through the dark. He must have followed Eleanor's trail. Finch turned toward him, and that single hesitation was enough. Clara lunged. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the confined space. Eleanor screamed. Finch stumbled backward, the weapon clattering to the floor. Clara fell to her knees beside him as the police rushed in. When the smoke cleared, Finch was breathing. Barely. His voice rasped, weak but urgent. Tell them what I did. Don't let him win again." And then he was gone. In the weeks that followed, the Beaumont scandal exploded across every newspaper in Connecticut. Headlines screamed, "Old money, old lies." The fire, the affair, the illegitimate heir, the cover-up at Hidden Lake. Eleanor was subpoenaed to testify. The People v. the Beaumont estate. The trial became a theater of ghosts. Lawyers argued over bloodlines and legacy while the truth sat quietly in Eleanor's lap. The locket, the confession, and the photograph of 3 smiling people who had destroyed one another. When it was her turn on the stand, she looked out over the courtroom, the reporters, the trustees, the strangers who wanted to see her fall. "My name is Eleanor Clara Beaumont," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. "And I am not ashamed of who I am." The room fell silent. The lawyer for the trustees rose. "Miss Beaumont, do you understand that your claim could void an estate worth millions? That your own testimony may destroy your inheritance?" Eleanor nodded. "Then it will finally mean something honest." Behind her, Clara sat in the gallery, eyes glistening, proud and broken all at once. The verdict came days later. The estate dissolved, assets redistributed, the Beaumont name officially closed. What the dynasty built in silence, truth had dismantled in daylight. That night, as the press hounded her outside the courthouse, Eleanor slipped away. She found her mother waiting near a parked car, its headlights cutting through the rain. "It's over," Clara whispered. Eleanor looked back at the courthouse, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. "No," she said softly. "It's finally beginning." But as they drove away into the mist, a shadow lingered near the courthouse steps, a man in a dark coat watching them go. Richard Hale lit a cigarette, eyes narrowing. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document marked Beaumont Holdings, private clause, unreleased. And under it, a single handwritten line. The heir was never supposed to survive the fire. A year had passed since the trial. The Beaumont estate was gone, its ashes overtaken by ivy and silence. The headlines had faded, the reporters moved on to newer tragedies, but for Eleanor the ghosts remained. They always would. She and her mother now lived quietly in a small seaside town in Maine, far from the marble corridors and suffocating whispers of old Connecticut. The world knew her as Eleanor Clark, not Beaumont. A new name, a clean slate. But every night when the wind pressed against the windows, she heard echoes of that other life. The study door creaking open, the sound of fire cracking through memory, her father's voice whispering. She was never supposed to know. On a fog-thick morning, as gulls screamed above the gray Atlantic, a letter arrived. No return address, just her name, written in that same deliberate script she'd once seen on the will. Her heart stuttered. She hadn't seen that handwriting since the night of the fire. "Who's it from?" Clara asked softly, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. Eleanor turned the envelope over. The seal was red wax, pressed with the familiar crest. The Beaumont lion. Someone who shouldn't exist anymore, she murmured. Inside was a single page, aged but intact. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, then the truth I failed to tell has already found its way to you. But there is one more secret I carried, one even the trial never uncovered. The night of the fire, I left something behind. In the vault beneath the study floor, under the marble I imported myself, there lies a safe. Inside it are the original deeds, the true ledgers, and proof that the Beaumont fortune wasn't built on inheritance, but on theft. The family's empire began with lies, and I let it end with them. If you wish to rebuild, start not with what I left, but with what I owed. Forgive me if you can. Your father, Charles E. Beaumont. Eleanor lowered the letter, her hands shaking. The vault beneath the study that had burned to the ground. Her mother's eyes widened as she read it. He's still reaching out from the grave. Even now he can't let you be free. But Eleanor only stared at the ocean. Maybe he's not asking me to stay trapped in his past. Maybe he's asking me to finish it. That week she returned to Connecticut, to the ruins. The mansion was little more than a skeleton of brick and stone, its foundations cracked, its walls scorched black. Vines had crept through shattered windows, but the floor of the old study still remained, marble, fractured but whole enough to remember. She dug for hours, her hands raw, until her shovel struck metal. A vault. Inside, just as the letter promised, were ledgers bound in leather, each one marked with transactions. Offshore accounts, false charities, bribes. Money stolen from the workers who'd built the Beaumont empire generations ago. And on top of them, a single envelope addressed to her. Inside was a smaller letter. Not from her father, from her mother. "Eleanor, if you found this, then you've chosen truth over peace. I feared that day, but I see now you were born for it. I lied to protect you, but I never meant to make you live in silence. The Beaumont name doesn't define you. What you do next will." Eleanor sat among the ruins, tears mixing with ash. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the charred marble floor like gold. She took the two letters, his and hers, and laid them side by side. Then quietly, she struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into smoke. Some truths weren't meant to be kept. As she walked away from the ruins for the last time, the sea wind carried the faint scent of smoke again. But this time, it didn't smell like guilt. It smelled like freedom. And somewhere deep in her chest, the whisper that had once started everything finally went silent.